start again? I'm making it ready.
We're going to look at we're going to start tonight by looking at the very last verse in Ezekiel. We're going to be doing a couple of things. The first part's going to be review, and I'll explain that in a second.
We didn't get
Yeah.
We got some more. Sneak in here on me. How many you need?
On the early part, we're going to do a review for most of us. Two reasons for that. One, we never have exactly the same people in a adult class, and so there's just a couple of things that I think are just really important to kind of do contextually. But I want to look at two things as we start. Lord willing, next week, Kelly is going to take our class. Our family has gone to deep South Texas for 20 years, and Lord willing, we'll leave on Friday to do that. The last part, chapters 40 through 48, has probably as many interpretations as the book of Revelation. It's just this massive description, and because it is apocalyptic, a lot of people have then gone ahead and taken it literally, and there's various shades of this, but for some who feel like Jesus is going to come back and reign on earth for 1,000 years, then they think this is going to be the description of what's going to happen in Jerusalem when he comes to reign in Jerusalem. I try to be very tactful when I talk with people like this. I tell people if Jesus comes back and sets foot on earth, he's going to have to apologize because he said, my kingdom is not of this world. And you read those passages, you know, the trumpet sound, we will meet him in the air, and so shall we ever be. And so the people who are into, and I use the word millennial, 1,000-year, the people who are into a 1,000-year millennial reign, then this section in 40 through 48 is just fertile ground for imagination. The very, very last verse says, the name of the city henceforth shall be the Lord is there. And one of the things we're going to look at, again, we're going to just review mostly tonight. There are two different occasions where, and I just kind of shudder when I read this, but there's two different occasions where Ezekiel sees in a vision the glory of the Lord leave the temple and leave Jerusalem. And different generations wouldn't even think of this, but when I read something like that, I go, dun, 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 dun. This is not good. And so the vision of the end of the destruction of the city is the glory of the Lord has left. That's earlier in the text. And so Kelly has found a group of, we'll just describe drawings.
It's kind of an animated production of what the chapters 40 through 43 are describing as far as the temple.
Good. And in other words, we can read it. I don't have any good dimensions on shapes and sizes. And so then to kind of read part of the text and say, here's a visual of what he's talking about, then that will be the class for next week, and that will tie that together. But I want just several kind of anchor things I want to do tonight. With all the things that take place, the Lord is there. I got to listen to E.H. Imes, who was 92 at the time, do a lesson on a snowy Wednesday night in Memphis. And his lesson was entitled, Do Not Be Overcome with Evil, but Overcome Evil with Good. And once he'd kind of set the stage and walked through that at 92 years of age, he just described the tragedy, which in Memphis, Tennessee, which would include Elvis, the tragedy of people who had what everybody is searching and looking for, all kinds of either money or fame or whatever, and their lives ended in a disaster. And when I read the descriptions in the book of Revelation about heaven, all of that is, all of that's just good and wonderful, but what's going to make heaven is God's going to be there. Jesus is going to be there. And the word living, the living creatures, we could be living in a hut or in the desert as long as God is there. And I'm all for gates of pearl, streets of gold, don't have any problem with that. But there's a lot of people in this world who've had all of this stuff but didn't have the means to enjoy it, either through activities or lack of being able to function with that. And as you kind of go through this journey with this book, just remember at the very end, the Lord is there. Now, and we're going to do two outlines. On the first outline, I want you to turn to the back page. And for those who are listening online, I'll just describe briefly what this is. This is at the back of a Greek New Testament, and they just list the different Old Testament references in New Testament books. So if you look in the second column, about 2/3 of the way down, you'll see Ezekiel. Okay, see second column? And about 2/3 of the way down, that's where it starts. And what I want you to notice is then how many columns? 1, 2, 3 entire columns are given of either references or direct quotations from the book of Ezekiel. Now, we'll mention this on the run later. And when you've had books for 50 years, they're not always returned, and that's fine because I'd rather them be used. But I had a book where a guy did his dissertation just on Old Testament references in the book of Revelation. And from my memory, he cited in one book 404 either references or quotations to the Old Testament just in the book of Revelation. I mean, see, like for example, Jezebel. And you just kind of go through that. and I kind of laugh in that if anybody who's persecuting Christians gets a hold of the book of Revelation, they're just going to think they're crazy. There's not going to be anything in that you could be charged with because, again, apocalyptic, the hidden message. But without having time to even look at these, what I want you to notice is, and if you've been in classes on Sunday morning, I love the word echoes. A lot of times you'll hear something in the New Testament, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the coming of the Son of Man. They were eating and drinking and giving in marriage in the days of Noah. You hear an echo from the Old Testament, and then here is the application given in the New. But without having time to look at that, look at the number of references sprinkled throughout your New Testament related to the book of Ezekiel. The other thing is you run your eye down to them, how many of them are in the book of Revelation. And I'll leave you to look at that. I'd like for us to, and again we'll do this very quickly, the chart that's on the very front. And we're not going to go through line by line as we did before, but if you, we wouldn't have said this a few years ago, if you carry a Bible. I'm still going to say that, but you'll know what I mean, and some of you could take a picture of it if you have an electronic one. But for years, I have always carried this in front of my Bible. And so if there's a Bible reading from such and such a book, I like to kind of know where's the time period, who are the people associated with it, what's going on. And so in the top left-hand corner are 7 time periods, and then we'll go 8 through 13, or 8 through 12. But I want us to start with number 9, and I want to make 2 comments, and we'll just do these very, very briefly. If you've been a Christian for a while, in fact, Tim talked to someone on a golf course within the last month or so. If you talk with people very often, you're going to hear someone talk about the vengeful, angry God of the Old Testament. And that's something you're just going to hear an awful lot about. And what I want you to notice is that as you come through the first 8 time periods, everything's pretty well in a linear order. And as God's people become more faithless, God becomes more faithful. And I didn't think of this till later, so I didn't get to run it off. 2, 4, 6, 8. There are 9 times in the Old Testament that God refers to my servants, the prophets. John Willis has written some little books on my servant, the prophets. And so every time there is a major disaster coming upon God's people because of their faithlessness, then God is going to raise prophets to try to call them back. And the first one is here, and we erased it. But Isaiah, his ministry is from 740 to 700. And in 721, the northern 10 tribes are taken away. Prior to that, and remember we've used the acronym, the little southern boy, he'll say Hi, Ma, Hosea, Isaiah. Micah and Amos are contemporaries in that they're all around the time of the fall of Jerusalem. Hosea is the only prophet who lives in the northern kingdom. I just, again, shake the chills down. Go marry the lady off the street, bring her in. Okay, I don't know what they thought in ancient times. I would say, God, can we at least do a blood test? I mean, just think about how gross this is. Here you are, a prophet, and God says, there's the lady that walks the streets, and you go marry her. And the children are going to be named Jezreel, place of punishment, not to be pitied, and not my people. And what happens? She goes back to the trade. She goes back to the street. And God says, you go buy her back, and you bring her back, and you act like nothing has happened. And her physical sexual immorality is an indication of the disgust that God feels about the spiritual adultery and immorality of his people. Okay, Amos, shepherd, dresser, sycamore trees, migrant worker. He's from the south. You go preach to the people in the north. Micah as well. And your major prophets always arise when there is a major catastrophe about to happen with God's people. Now, the next one, and Judah, good. We have these here, and I know that the things are hard to see. The first group of captives are taken away in 606. And so God's going to raise Jeremiah, and again, with my small children, J-E-R, Jeremiah is in Jerusalem, and we always did this because he is the weeping prophet. And so 20 years before the first fall of Jerusalem, God raises Jeremiah to speak to the people. And if you'll notice, Habakkuk and Zephaniah on the very bottom are also raised during that period of time. So there are 3 times that God's people are carried into captivity. 606, Daniel is taken away. Ezekiel's taken away in 598, 597. And then they have another rebellion, and Nebuchadnezzar comes back, and the city is destroyed, 587, 586. So there's 3 different periods of time. But notice, for the people who are exiles and the people who are struggling, 1, God has Jeremiah in Jerusalem through the fall of the city. Okay, you read the blessings and the cursings in Leviticus and in the law of Moses. And again, it's morbid. They're eating their children. It's just, we can't go there mentally in terms of that kind of starvation, and because of, again, their continued disobedience. And so Jeremiah, the weeping prophet, is there through the whole thing. They allow him to remain. And again, this is personal judgment. 2 of the saddest chapters in the Old Testament to me are 1, Judges 2, there arose a generation that what?
They don't know God. Knew
not the Lord. And again, I just go, dun, 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 things are going to go downhill. Nearly equally, he was not like his father David. But in Jeremiah 44, the people come to Jeremiah and they say, you know, when we were worshiping the Queen of Heaven, everything was fine. And you came along and started talking about somebody called God, and look at all the trouble that's come upon us since then. And you're just kind of going, oh, these are the people of God. And the survivors are blaming Jeremiah as God's prophet for the fall of Jerusalem. Can I say backwards, inside out, back to front? And Jeremiah keeps saying, stay in the city, stay in the city. And they said, no, we're going to go to Egypt. And so they forcibly kidnap Jeremiah and drag him off to Egypt against his will. But major catastrophe, major prophet. So Daniel is sent in the first group. He's going to be in the king's court, and he will be through the rise of the Babylonian Empire. The night of the handwriting on the wall is going to be 539, Mene Tekel Parsin, and the Babylonian Empire is going to fall to the Medes and the Persians, and within 3 years, the people start going home. Now, Ezekiel, and this is why I wanted to do this, Ezekiel is a contemporary, and there's at least, I think, 3 times in the book of Ezekiel that he refers to Daniel. I'm going to use the word ghetto. The exiles are not living in plush comfort. And we're going to look at this again as we look at this young man. He is going to be 25 years old. He's born into a priestly family. He has the potential to be serving in the temple. And at 25, he is carried off into captivity, and he spends the rest of his life speaking to the exiles in captivity. The ones who are left until 587, 86 have this kind of looking down their nose and looking at the exiles and things. And God says it's going to be the exiles who are going to come back. And so Daniel's going to have the visions. He's in the royal court. Ezekiel's out in the country. Ezekiel's out with the common people. And we're going to highlight what takes place after that here in just a second. At the very end, and again, we mentioned this, the last 3 books of history, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi, all take place after the captivity. But all I want you to see is when a major catastrophe happens, God raises a major prophet. So if you look at the page that has the graph, it's going to be the same thing, but just in a linear visual. And all I want you to do, and we've pretty well covered these, they're in the same way except they're just along a line. When I look at the Old Testament, and we did this first or second night, is it megaphone, the thing cheerleaders use at college games with the, little on this end and it grows larger? The volumes of the Old Testament, as you get closer to the end, increase. And so if you notice, like I said, the first 8 time periods, it's just one book. It's a linear order. And then as the people become more and more unfaithful and there's more and more distress and more trouble, then God sends more prophets. And most people have no idea where the books at the end of the Old Testament fit. And if you start with those major prophets and then look at the ones underneath, and that will kind of give you a hint in terms of where things fall together. Any comments or questions? Anything you want to throw out? Yes.
So the minor prophets are kind of in an order, sort of, right? But why is Obadiah kind of up front with, does it look like he's about 150 years to live?
Yes. 3 of the minor prophets are after the end. 3 of the minor prophets are with Isaiah. And 3 of the minor prophets are to nations outside of Israel. So Jonah, we're good with that one. He goes to Nineveh. I don't know if it's 100, 150 years later, Nahum writes to Nineveh. And as the people are going through the captivity and stuff, their cousins, the Edomites, are standing at the crossroads, the fords, and everything else, and they're harassing God's people who are trying to escape from captivity. They live in this upper mountainous rocky area, and they think, oh, we're safe, we're secure, nothing can happen. And again, sorry, for my little children, Obadiah writes to the Edomites, hear the D, Obadiah writes to the Edomites, and he says, God's going to bring you down. And because of their harassing their cousins, going all the way back through the origins, then 3 of our minor prophets are written to nations outside of Israel, and Obadiah is written to the Edomites outside of that. Anything else? Biblical names are always important. Were any of you given a special family name, either through genealogy or relationship or special occasion or anything?
My dad called me lame brain when I was little.
Was that justified or just made up?
Back in those days, I think everybody had one. 50 years ago, 60 years ago.
My dad was in a small country school, and they literally spanked his hand and would not let him write left-handed. They forced him to write right-handed. Who is the name of the baseball field at Norman? It's called what? Dale Mitchell Field, because he was a left-handed pitcher and played for the Indians, played in the World Series. If you go down to the ballpark downtown, there's a huge area about that. Kind of in passive-aggressive retaliation against this, then he named me Dale in hopes that I would be left-handed. And Wayne, you don't dig in on a left-hand pitcher the same way you do a right-hand pitcher. It just, the release and everything else. Do we know something about left-handed pitchers?
Left-handed batter.
Left-handed batter, same thing. Boy, growing up, we had our littlest guy on the team was left-handed, and he could drag bunt, third base line, be halfway there. He was devastating because the strike zone was so small, and he was so clever with just doing it either way. And to start the game, you had to face this little tiny left-hander. Was always hard for everybody. Anyway, so I was named Dale in hopes that I would be left-handed and play baseball. I ruined everything. I'm right-handed, and I played basketball. So that's not true. In a small school, you had to play everything. So I played third base and batted second because we're a small school, and if you can walk and chew gum, we need you to pitch in and to play. But Hebrew names are always significant, and a priestly parents, if you stretch it out just to a common name, may God strengthen him. God strengthens, or God is strong. And what's so interesting about this is that everything that Ezekiel had hoped and prayed and planned for the first 25 years of his life is just going to go out the window when he with 10,000 other people are carried off into Babylonian captivity. So just stop and think. Guys, you're raised in a priestly family, you know, mom and dad, Levites, Zodiac family, and just the whole point, and you can't be a priest until you're 30. So all of the early training, all the other things are headed that direction. And may God strengthen him is carried off into captivity. Everything that he had hoped and dreamed and thought would happen in his life just goes out the window. This is also, I just touched my head. Josiah, the last good king, and I came here to say this is just so unreal. They were cleaning out the temple and they found a copy of the law of Moses, and no one had a copy of the law of Moses. Can you imagine being in Jerusalem and being the people of God, and the list goes on, and we lose the Bible? And so they find the copy of the law of Moses, they start a religious revival, repentance of things, and that takes place for a while. Foolishly, Josiah goes out from Jerusalem to keep Pharaoh Necho from coming up from Egypt to join with the Assyrians fighting the Babylonians, and he's killed. So at least in the early life of Ezekiel, there starts to be a religious revival, and then from then on, spiritually, everything is going to go downhill. So if you look at 1:1, Jehoiachin is the king at the time. He is going to surrender, and this is the second time of the 3 times Jerusalem's captured. He surrenders, so the king, 10,000 are carried away. We talked about this earlier. If you could, and they couldn't, if you could go across the desert, it's roughly 500 miles. So think here in Jackson, Tennessee, the other side of Memphis. But because of the desert, you have to go all the way up to the top to Syria. So it's 900 miles from home. Our earliest missionaries, late 1800s, 1900s, went to Africa. They stayed in Africa for 15 years before they came home. And you had to go to Cape Town. You could only book a passage somewhere to England, and then you had to go down to the dock and book a passage, hopefully to New York or something, and they came back. Can you imagine how different you are, your family is, your home is, and your country if you're gone for 15 years? They went back, and the second time, they came back 9 years later. So in 25 years, they came home twice. I've just cried because they're not the same. Nothing's the same. But you think about these exiles. Here you are, and again, our young man, planning, raising, we're going to be a priest in the temple, da-da-da-da-da-da. The captivity happens, then you're drug off 900 miles away, and you're living with these exiles out in the country. And remember, what were the 2 things that God told him that his audience were? They have foreheads of flint, and they have hearts of stone. And so every dream and everything that he hoped would happen just evaporates and goes out the window, and here he finds himself exiled in a far, far away. So 1:2, when he's about 30, then God calls him to be a prophet. And these apocalyptic, these visions that are going to be given in Ezekiel, we're going to come again, especially in Revelation. But the most elaborate call of a prophet, the seeing the glory of God and on, takes place with a displaced, disgruntled young man who, as far as we know, never ever gets to go home. And one of the writers I read, he said, the brighter that you could see the glory of God, the darker the sins of the people that he worked with. Okay. So, quick reminder, a priest speaks to God on behalf of the people. I'm talking about in terms of sacrifices. There's also a side, the priests were also to be teachers. But this example, a priest, when they offer sacrifices, speaks to God on behalf of the people. A prophet speaks to the people on behalf of God. So I grew up hearing, "Thus saith the Lord." And so the prophet is to be the spokesman, the mouthpiece of God. And whatever God tells the prophet, then that's what he's supposed to speak. So Isaiah 6, we did this on a Sunday night, saw the glory of God in a vision. Ezekiel even has a grander vision of that. And then when he's called, and this is the middle of 1:3, the first 6 years, the message is one of judgment. And then after the fall of Jerusalem, the ministry focus changes. Remember, we did the dry bones. Here's this whole valley of dry bones. And you go preach to them. They start clicking together, and then the flesh comes. And the vision is God, again, apocalyptic, symbolic. But if God can bring life to dry bones, He can bring life and resurrect the exiles who are going back to Jerusalem. And that's one of those amazing visuals that's in the book. So He's the most visual of all the prophets. This is just above the word Jeremiah, number 2. Ezekiel, the last 6 chapters of Daniel, 7 through 12. Zechariah. These are our 3 primarily apocalyptic books in the Old Testament, and they're going to become the basis for the book of Revelation. So here's 3 guys, and this is why I wanted to kind of do this introductory. God is going to raise 3 prophets in totally different environments to work with His people when it seems like all hope is lost. Temples burnt down, walls are torn down, all those people are scattered, and it's going to be a period of time where God's going to start sending exiles back. So here's the 3 guys. Jeremiah, weeping prophet, stays in Jerusalem. Daniel's carried to the royal court. Ezekiel is then going to be working with the captives. And this expression over and over, they will know that I'm the Lord. Next page. And listen to God speak to the prophet when, at least from the human perspective, all has been lost. The term Son of Man, and we did a part of a lesson on this previously, the one term that Jesus uses to identify Himself is Son of Man. Son of Man came to seek and save the lost. I did not come to be served, but to... If He goes around calling Himself Son of God, they're going to try to crucify Him earlier than they did. And Son of Man is both human. Son of Man is the sorrow, the weeping. Son of Man, can I do it this? He puts the mantle of the prophets on. And Jesus wears the mantle of the prophets in His ministry. And so when you look at Ezekiel 2, I will speak to you, verse 3, I send you. They've rebelled, they've transgressed. Verse 5, whether they hear or refuse to hear, rebellious house, they will know that a prophet's been among them. Don't be afraid. Don't be dismayed. You shall speak my words to them. Son of man, hear what I say to you. So I'll give you more time to do 3:2 on your own, but just think about this. I'm using the word shock and disorientation. Firstly, all your life you've been headed this direction, this is what we're going to do, and on and on. And then God intervenes, and your life takes a turn, and you kind of, and it's not like you wake up one morning, you had to make the journey, but still, compared to where you were going for the first 25 years, how disorienting is it to be in a totally different culture, a different place, and this isn't what you plan to do at all? None of us know when God is going to open doors in our lives that we may never have thought about or planned to do. Kent and I went to Australia first in 74. Sheila and I went in 77. We're attending school in Memphis. We got one more year of school. We have talked with about 10 couples about forming a team to go back. Eventually 4 of us, including Kyle's mom and dad, the Kazees, went and started a church eventually. So we were all going to finish school. We're all going to go together and everything else. The next to the last night that we were in Sydney, David Roper invited us over, and he said, we're going back to preach at Eastside, and the Eastside Church has been looking for 6 months for someone to replace us. Would you and Sheila consider coming by yourselves ahead of time, and the Eastside Church will pay for support? Ron Canifax has been the deacon in charge of this for a decade. So you have a church that's been doing this for a decade. They'll pay for moving your stuff, and they typically ask you to stay for 3 years at a time. But a church that's been doing this for 10 years would like to see if you would come ahead of time. Okay? I hardly slept at all the next 2 nights. That wasn't the plan. And when you've been the ringleader in trying to get 10 families to go with you, those of you who know, my brother is just a wonderful guy, but he's also very direct. And he said, "That boy, Herb, pour everything you know about team missions down a rat hole and just run off by yourself." I wonder what my brother says about this, you know. We go visit the Eastside elders. We end up knowing all of them from some other type of thing. And we sweat and we prayed and we struggled, and we finally decided to do that. But that wasn't the plan. We were all going to wait. We're all going to go together. And so at the age of 26, with a 9-month-old son, then we get on a plane and move halfway around the world by ourselves. All of us at one time or another have had either a goal or a direction or a dream or a date, and it didn't turn out that way. For those of us that have heard a country western song a time or two, there's a song that says, "I thank God for unanswered prayers." So some things that we've really set our hearts on, and then something happens and everything changes, and we're thinking, but that's not what the plan was. And what becomes important, at some point, all of us have to decide, am I going to follow my plan or God's plan? And that's why my heart goes out to this young man, because he's just focused, the family's there, the tradition's there, and then it's like he wakes up one morning 900 miles away, and then 6 years later God says, "Oh, by the way, Mr. Priest, I want you to be a prophet." And it's like going, "Prophet? I didn't grow up to be a prophet. I grew up to be a priest." That's okay. I want you to be my prophet. The word watchman, 2 different times. Remember, the watchman's on the wall, and he has one job. If you see enemy forces coming, you warn the people. If they don't listen to you, that's their problem. But if you don't warn them, it's on you. And so as God, can I say it this way, and I'm not trying to be too colloquial, as God converts a priest to a prophet, everybody follow what I'm trying to say? You know, he takes 25 years of training and expectation, and then within that 6-year period of time after the captivity and stuff, he says, "Oh, by the way, here's this vision, and I want you to do something totally different than what you ever dreamed and thought of doing earlier. And I want you, as the prophet, to be the watchman on the wall." And that's just such a contrast from what he had hoped and planned. I laugh at this. This is 4:2. There are at least 3 or 4 times, now that God has called him to a prophet, he's mute and he can't talk. Okay, for those of you who weren't here earlier, Tim and I are good friends. Can you imagine Tim Lewis not being able to talk 6 months? He would bust. He would either be writing something. He is so expressive and just so, and so here you are, the reluctant prophet, and you've been planning to be a priest, and now God calls you to be a prophet, Charles, and God comes along and does, you can't say anything. And I'm going, this is even worse than I thought, because if I'm going to be God's spokesman, how can I be? Well, when the time is right, or when Jerusalem is going to be captured, I will open your mouth and you will speak my words. So I love this example at the bottom. He's raised as a priest, a lot of visions with the temple and sacrifice. He is a prophet with a message, but I like the sense of shepherd. He's shepherding God's people. So next page. There are visions of the city of Jerusalem, and we covered this much earlier. Elders are involved in idolatry. They're worshiping the sun. They're burning incense to idols in the temple. And it's like here he was going to be a priest, and the place that he had hoped to go work is a place of idolatry, the literal temple itself. The judgment's going to come. And when you look in the middle, God says, not for the people, but for the sake of my name, I will vindicate this. And when you look at number 1 at the bottom, they will know that a prophet's been among them, and they'll know I'm the Lord. So if you've come in recently, here's what's important. The first 23 chapters are judgment because the city's going to fall. And in chapter 24, God comes to him and says, your wife is going to die tonight. And tomorrow, you will not put on sackcloth and ashes. You will not mourn. You will not weep. And the people will ask you why. Well, the city of Jerusalem the attack has begun on the city of Jerusalem. And so this is going to be 587. And the day that Jerusalem is attacked to finally be destroyed, his wife dies. Okay, I'm very human. Gary, my first words would be, God, let's leave her out of this. At least I get to go home to somebody who's on my side, and I'm with all these people who don't want to listen, who don't care, and everything else. Please leave her out of it. And that's not what happens. He says, that evening, my wife died, and on the morrow I did what I was commanded. My dad on the farm would say, these guys have a lot of starch in their shirts. This is just absolutely amazing that God allows, and I can't even say visual aid because it's so hurtful, but God allows the visual aid of the loss of his wife and the grief that would bring to the heart of the prophet to express the grief that God's going to feel with the coming destruction of the city. And think about this. Moses, Midian, Daniel, and Ezekiel are all called to be prophets in a foreign land. Okay, last page. Highlights. We mentioned this. The glory of the Lord has left the temple. You'll see the two references, Ezekiel 10:18, Ezekiel 11. And the dwelling place of God is no longer going to be there. Apocalyptic is something that's hidden, and it's like you pick... Guys, have you ever come home and there's either soup or stew on the stove and you pick it up to have a sniff or smell and see what... Apocalyptic is something that's hidden, and it's like you pull the lid off in order to look in to see what's there. Look at these brief references in Ezekiel and Revelation. And this is why the things written before time are written for our learning, that we through patience and comfort of the Scriptures might have hope. So many things that we have in the New Testament, especially the book of Revelation, there was a precursor. There was an earlier time. So the living creatures and these kind of bizarre looking creatures that we have both in Revelation and Ezekiel, creatures like a lion, an ox, a living creature the face of a man, an eagle. But look at this, and I'll leave you to look at the passages. The 144,000, eat the scroll, the great supper, that should be Gog, misspell it, Gog and Magog, the New Jerusalem, and the measuring of the city and the river of life. And so next week, as you look at the things with Kelly, there's going to be several things that will come up in the description in chapters 40 through 48, apocalyptically about God is going to be there, and they're going to be symbols that are going to be carried over into the book of Revelation. We spent a whole night on this one, but this is really important. Just by opportunity, I've talked to a lot of Calvinists, okay, a little bit extreme. Saved, lost, saved, lost, saved, lost. It just defies comprehension how you can believe that God is going to arbitrarily, and even Calvin talked about the visible and the invisible church. And there's people who come to the visible church who won't be saved. And there's people, it makes no sense at all. The one single verse that I think is the most helpful is this Ezekiel 18, starting with 20. The soul that sins will die. The son will not suffer for the iniquity of the father, nor the father for the iniquity of the son. We do not inherit either our parents' sin or the sin of, we don't inherit sin at all. And of all things, Ezekiel 28:15, this is a Gentile ruler, the prince of Tyre. You were blameless in your ways from the days that you were created until iniquity was found in you. So those are really, really important. So the last thing, Moses said in Numbers 12, if there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, will make myself known to him. In a vision, I will speak to him in a dream. And when I read that, I think that is no more true of any of the prophets more than Ezekiel. And all of these visuals and these dreams are things that God sent to him. And last two things. In apocalyptic, there's so much about what I heard and I saw, because it's the vision. And notice Ezekiel 1, 13th year, as I was among the exiles, the heavens were open and I saw visions of God. It's kind of like watching a movie when they start seeing these visions and things. And then guess what? Revelation opens. John bore witness to the Word of God, the testimony of Jesus Christ, and to all that he saw. So, the last word in the Bible is John on the Isle of Patmos, and it is given in apocalyptic language because of the oppression of the people. And again, if any of the Christians are caught with a copy of the book of Revelation, what are you going to be charged with in court other than insanity? But if you know the Old Testament and you know all of these references, then the message becomes very clear. We're going to win. And the word conquer is used over and over and again, not of a military thing, but of a spiritual thing. And the foundation and the basis of the apocalyptic in the New Testament comes from, especially from our dear prophet Ezekiel. And just be thinking, 25 years of your life, you've been headed one direction, and then God comes along and changes everything. And what happened hundreds of years ago still happens today. God bless.